Hello, everyone. Welcome to this joint webinar between Blackfire and CircleCI. I'm Jérôme Vieildon. I'm a developer advocate at Blackfire.io. Well, I'm gonna first give the mic to Aaron from CircleCI. So, hello, Aaron.
Thanks, Jerome. Hey, everyone. My name is Aaron Stillwell. I'm a solutions engineer here at CircleCI. What that means is my background is in building software. I'm really a developer at heart, but my role here in Circle is helping particularly our kind of newer customers to the platform really get the most out of CI/CD on our platform. So the plan for today, this is mostly for Jerome to really dive into Blackfire and how we can leverage CircleCI to deliver performance-based testing. I want to let him get into the weeds of that, but before we do so, we're going to give a quick introduction to CircleCI for those of you who are maybe not as familiar with the Circle platform. We're going to look at some kind of high-level terminology and how CircleCI works, and then that should hopefully set the stage for Jerome to really go deep on how Blackfire leverages Circle. So that should take just sort of 10 minutes or so and hopefully get everyone to at least the kind of same level for us to go deeper. Jerome, is there anything you want to add before we kick off?
Oh, that's fine for me. So please.
Cool. So at CircleCI, our mission is to make it as easy as possible for you, the developer, to go from idea to really delivery and deployment. So at CircleCI, we were founded back in 2011 as one of the sort of earlier pioneers of the YAML-based CI/CD approach that many of you might be familiar with now and has certainly become something of a standard in CI/CD. As I mentioned, it's really our focus to enable you as developers to think less about how you get set up in running your tests in the cloud, deploying, really doing anything else you want to do between commit to deploy. We want you to spend less time thinking about how to accomplish all that and hopefully get out of your way and just hopefully deliver feedback quicker on every commit. So we've got over 300 people thinking about this kind of wide problem set now. It's all we do. It's what we spend all day thinking about. And on the CircleCI cloud platform, we're now doing over 40 million builds per month. That number actually might be quite out of date now. It's quite hard to keep up to date and keep on top of. So where we sit is really between the kind of VCS, i.e. GitHub, Bitbucket. At the moment, we're actually an OAuth app that's built on top of those platforms. We sit between them and your deployment environment, whatever that may be, Azure, GCP, AWS, an Android device somewhere. And what we're seeing today is more and more go on between the commit to the deploy. So there's more and more automation going on outside of the traditional build, test, and deploy. And Blackfire are a great example of that. So now people aren't just doing build, run some unit tests, deploy somewhere. They're also doing things like performance-based testing. We also have folks who are doing vulnerability scanning, people who are deploying infrastructure as code, and far more. So the focus of today's session, from my point of view, as we just get up to speed with the Circle platform, is how we actually enable that kind of extensibility so that you can do whatever you want and integrate with any third parties in the middle of this process. So to recap, in order to accomplish all of that, CircleCI, as I mentioned already, we're YAML-based, configuration as code. We allow our customers incredible flexibility in how you define the compute you need on a per job basis. So some customers choose to just specify a Docker image, pull down a container, run a job in that container. But you can also specify the compute you need on a per job basis. So maybe you want to use a container, but you want to use 20 CPUs and 40 gigs of RAM because you're building something non-trivial. But you may also want to, at the same time, leverage a Windows machine, a Mac machine, a Linux VM, and so forth. So we aim to offer that kind of diverse array of compute at your fingertips from that YAML-based configuration. And we do so at pretty high scale, as I've already mentioned. So we have customers who'll be using thousands of machines at once without ever having to worry about sort of operations or figuring out the logic around how to split their work across these different machines. And at the core of this, as I mentioned, is that YAML-based configuration. And so we've come up with a way of delivering packages of CI/CD, or in Blackfire's case, performance testing, so that you can extend the platform without having to always be reinventing the wheel. All of that is built with security in mind. So we're a fully hosted platform in the cloud, and we've gone away and done the hard work of getting certifications like SOC 2 Type 2. In the US, we've got FedRAMP certification and so forth. So that, again, that's something you don't have to give as much worry about. Rather than just keep talking for days on end, which I promise you I can do, we're just going to look through one of my projects, again, very quickly, just a couple of minutes to explore how some of these top-level features work. We'll then talk just a little bit more about those orbs, and then we'll hand off to Jerome to look at Blackfire. So what I've got here is a project, a fairly trivial project that's running on CircleCI. It's a Rails-based application. And on the left-hand side of my screen here, we have what we call a workflow, which is really an acyclic graph between the different jobs that we want to run through in order to build, test, deploy, run performance monitoring, security scanning, what have you. And on the right-hand side of my screen is that YAML-based configuration that is telling CircleCI what to do, essentially. And this YAML-based configuration is simply checked into version control in our Git repository. You'll see here on the right-hand side, I tell CircleCI that I want to run some build jobs, and my test jobs require that those build jobs be complete before we move forward. And that essentially constructs this graph we have on the left-hand side. So let's jump into one of these jobs, not in too much detail, but just to give you a little flavor about how these jobs can work. And I'll open the corresponding YAML on the right-hand side. So you'll see for this particular job where I install some Ruby dependencies, I first of all, in my YAML, specify this executor, which if we look to the top of this YAML is simply a Docker image that is hosted on Docker Hub. So we're not going to go with a full VM. We're just going to pull that container on your behalf. We'll spin that up, and you'll see that's much quicker than spinning up the full-blown VM that some of you might be familiar with. And then in that container, we'll run a sequence of steps that I've defined here. And those steps can ultimately consist of any bash or any commands that you can run in the container or VM if you're using one. And we've got some kind of inbuilt commands here. So you'll see here, rather than running some bash, we're saving a cache or restoring a cache. So we're providing you out of the box some helpful commands that we think you'll need in order to make this build, test, deploy process as fast as possible. So caching out of the box, we also have this notion of a workspace that allows us to share files between all those jobs that are in your workflow. Sometimes these jobs, they'll fail because maybe our unit tests failed, for example. So if I hop over to my next tab, I've got such a job here. And you'll see here, CircleCI is giving us our tests that have failed up front to highlight. Here's the assertions that have failed. And we do that with by leveraging the JUnit XML standard. But if I wanted to actually maybe debug this job further, perhaps because it's not simply a case of some assertions failing, we could rerun this job with SSH at the click of a button. CircleCI will automatically sync your SSH keys from Bitbucket or GitHub, and then we'll actually open up SSH for you to log in securely. And that's present regardless of whether you use a container or VM-based job. Finally, getting into the kind of meat and potatoes of today's session, if I go back to my original demo, we can actually see towards the end of my workflow here, I'm using this very last job called Heroku/deploy my Git. And that job is actually not one that I've defined myself in my own YAML. I'm not defining, well, to deploy to Heroku, I need to pull a container and install a CLI and run these different commands. You'll see in my workflow, I simply invoke Heroku/deploy via Git. And that whole job, execution environment, as well as all the steps needed, are actually defined in what we call an orb, which is those pre-packaged CI/CD configurations. And you'll see I'm pulling that in at the top here. So I'm pulling in this orb as a package, and then we're simply referencing the job that is exposed through this particular orb. We'll go into those in a little bit more detail in a moment before Jerome picks us up on Blackfire. Before I do, though, there's a fair bit more to the platform than this. Of course, today is just a case of hopefully level setting for Jerome to go deeper on Blackfire. But we do have some more advanced capabilities therein. Here's a quick job I like to show folks, which is actually from Facebook. This is one of their React builds. They build a number of their open source based projects on CircleCI. You'll see this job looks a little bit different from the ones we've looked at to date, as each job is actually running 20 different machines at the same time. And what CircleCI can do is enable you to actually split large test suites across many different machines at one time. And we can actually use the historical data on how long each test takes to run in order to evenly distribute your tests across 20, 50, 100 machines at one time to help you get through these big test suites in a much shorter period of time. So that's a flavor of the more advanced things we can do on the platform. But as mentioned, today is a little bit more of a focus on the orbs and the integrations and Blackfire specifically. So orbs is, again, it's that mechanism of shareable packages of CI/CD configuration that we expose. So the anatomy of an orb is based around reusable executors, which is maybe a definition of a Docker image on Docker Hub with some preset environment variables for you to build your jobs on top of. It's also allows you to expose the pre-built jobs, which is I'm going to use a Docker image and these environment variables, and in the container we will run these number of commands. It's a job that I used for that Heroku example we looked at earlier. But we can also run expose commands as well, which is sort of like almost like a pre-compiled notion of different bash steps that you want to run in a container or VM, but exposed as just a simple bit of YAML that we can jot in very concisely. So all this allows us to reduce the amount of configuration required, and again allows you as developers to think less about how you make everything work and more about just getting back to the project you're working on. So to reinforce what I mentioned there, we've got commands, which are well, essentially just steps in the execution environment. We've got executors, which is the execution environment itself, as well as the whole pre-packaged job that essentially takes care of everything. Finally, we have over 1,700, I believe, of these orbs available in our package registry as today. Of course, Blackfire being the one we'll be looking at closely today. But we have orbs that really cover the full spectrum of different tooling that we think you'd need in your CI/CD process. But anyone can build these orbs, so you can actually build them yourselves and publish them yourselves as well. If you want to check these out, following on from today's session, you can go to the orb registry linked here and actually search them yourselves and find all the different documentation on how to use this rich ecosystem to hopefully build a more concise, more efficient CI/CD process. So with that, I want to hand over to Jerome so we can dive deeper into how Blackfire leverages this platform to its own benefit.